Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the last webinar we have as part of Asset Management Awareness Month for 2018. We're glad that you were able to join us today. We have a big group of attendees on the line today, and we've got a big panel and a lot to cover. So I'm going to run through some very quick announcements before we jump into the discussion to make sure we have as much time as possible to talk about disposition and reutilization. First of all, I want to let everyone know that we are recording this presentation and we will be posting it on NPMA's YouTube site. So keep that in mind when you're asking questions towards the end of the discussion. If you do ask a question out loud, then that may be part of that recording, so just be aware of that. There are a couple of options for asking questions. The first is to raise your hand. If you look at your name in the attendee panel through the GoToWebinar tool, you'll notice that there's a hand icon. If you click on that hand icon, then basically you're raising your hand and letting me know that you have a question. And when we get to an appropriate time, I'll be able to unmute you so you can ask that question out loud. If you're using your telephone to call in for audio and not your computer mic and speakers, make sure that you've entered your audio PIN or I will not be able to unmute you. The alternative that you have is to type in a question. There's also a questions panel in the GoToWebinar area on your screen. If you want to type a question in, I can ask that on your behalf, but I will not announce your name. So that's how you can ask questions and remain anonymous on the recording if you prefer to go that route. So those are the couple of options for getting your questions answered. I'd also like to point out if anyone is on the phone but hasn't been able to log into the webinar, there aren't really slides to follow. We've got a little title introduction slide here, but you aren't missing out on anything with the presentation if you're not viewing the webinar at this time. I do also want to point out that NPMA is giving everyone who is an NPMA member 1 CEU credit for participating today. If you happen to be in a group and you're not logged into the webinar, or if you could only get into the phone portion and you're not on the web, please either send an email response to me or have someone in your group type a question over to me and just let me know who's participating with your group so that I can make sure everyone gets credit for participating today. So I think that covers the logistics here. So I am going to let us go ahead and get started, and I'm going to turn over the presentation to our moderator for today, Dr. Doug Getz.
Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate your help with this, and great to electronically see everybody that's out there for this Disposition and Reutilization panel as part of our Asset Management Awareness Month, right? Absolutely wonderful topic that was brainstormed by some of the survey responses we got on. So for those of you in the East and Central regions, good afternoon. For those of you in the Western region on the West Coast, you're still in morning time, so we welcome you. Good morning, all right? So definitely welcome to the panel discussion, Disposition, Reutilization. You know who I am. My name's Dr. Doug Getz. I'm going to serve as moderator, but I'm not the most important person on this. We have a wonderful, august panel here today, representatives from a broad spectrum of the property and asset management world. So I'd like to introduce them to you briefly. Mr. Joe Varecki, coming at us from a federal perspective. He is the Director of Personal Property Management of the Mid-Atlantic Zone from General Services Administration. And his job is responsibility to provide personal property disposal solutions primarily to all executive agencies. So we welcome you, Joe. Thank you for participating. We have Ms. Karen Yamnitz coming in from Defense Contract Management Agency, and she is the acting supervisor for the plant clearance group, but she's also a working plant clearance officer. So that's really a cool deal that she's on the cutting edge of all those disposal actions that we deal with, going through that wonderful system called Pcars. She's responsible for providing instructions that allow for the safe, economic, and timely disposal of excess government property to defense contractors within her specified geographic area. We have Mr. Scott Ray coming in from the university world. And, well, Scott is also at Stanford Management Office at Stanford, and he's the primary liaison with research-intensive areas, including the School of Engineering. So we do have to give Scott a moment of silence here because he has to deal with engineers, and I'm sure that many of you out there know what a dilemma, what a hardship that is, as well as other departments under the Dean of Research. So Scott has a Herculean task that he's involved with out there. And our hospital and medical facilities perspective, Mr. Art Kurland out there. Art's title, he is Director of Asset Management with the University Health System down in San Antonio, Texas. And humorously, I asked all of the representatives here on the panel today to give me a distillation of what they do, and Art's, I think, is the most interesting one. He says he is responsible for the overall strategic asset management plan that may be familiar to you who are comfortable with ISO 55000, 55001, the Strategic Asset Management Plan for the University Health System. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, you have a most august group here that will be answering some leading questions, that will be answering some questions from you folks out there in the field. Lots of good stuff there, but I'm going to start this with a question that I would like each of the representatives to address at some point, and that is, what are the priorities for disposal within your specific environment? And we have DCMA, GSA, the medical world, and the university world, and well, we're going to be gentlemen here, and we're going to let Ms. Karen Yamnitz go first, please. Karen, the floor is yours for a moment.
Thank you, Doug. Can you hear me okay?
I can, and therefore we assume the rest of you can.
Great. So our reutilization priorities are spelled out in FAR 45602-2. And just to kind of summarize, we get reuse within the program office that procured the items first, and then within all of DoD, and then it goes out to all federal agencies. And then at that point, the state surplus agencies can take a look to see if there's anything that they can reutilize. And then from that point on, anything that doesn't get donated or reutilized then comes back kind of to the plant clearance officer, and we make determinations whether we should sell the item, whether the item should be scrapped, abandonment's an option, and those things all depend on condition codes and demilitarization codes as well.
Very good. Well, thank you, Karen. Joe, that sort of piggybacks on yours, since really GSA is the big granddaddy for government property. Any thoughts on your part as to priorities there?
Yeah, I was going to say that our priorities, in a nutshell, are twofold. One, it would be timely disposal of personal property, and so we have a measurement or a metric. I would say it's like 48 days. So we want to make sure that when someone reports an asset to us, that we are able to help the agency dispose of that within a 48-day time frame, and that's split up between reutilization, donation, and sale. But essentially, the overall process we would hope would be within the confines of that 48-day time frame. So timely disposal would be the one priority, and that's because we recognize that there's a cost to maintaining personal property assets at people's facilities. And then the second would be basically that we want to get maximum return on those assets. So fundamentally, we believe reutilizing it or donating it through state agencies, as Karen alluded to for the donation program, that brings this, inherent more value to that item. But if we do have to sell it, we then want to gain back the most amount of money so we can return that money to the agency to offset new procurement or to put it back into the Treasury, since the money was initially purchased with taxpayers' funds. So essentially two priorities. One would be get the property out of there as fast as you can, and number two, get back the most return on that property through whatever avenue.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you sharing that. Two different environments, the university world and the hospital and medical facilities. may not always follow the structure of the GSA requirements or the FAR requirements. So, Scott, how about from a university perspective there?
Thanks, Doug. So from a university perspective, I'm going to break this down just a little bit because it's kind of a broad topic, at least from our perspective. But if the asset is a federally owned asset, we would, of course, seek disposition instruction from the sponsor or entity that whose title that asset belongs to. So we would first reach out to them and seek instruction, and then based on that instruction would move forward from there. In regards to assets that actually do belong to the university itself, we want to make sure that the asset is, first of all, reutilized around the campus. We want to make sure that the departments that are seeking disposition have actually reached out to other labs within their respective departments or other schools even around the campus, just to make sure that we have investigated reutilization. Otherwise, we want to make sure that it's processed through the proper Stanford channels, that the asset itself is clean, that the lab has taken the time to wipe it down if necessary, or clean it in some way so that we are not picking up something that could be potentially hazardous. And then, of course, we want to make sure that anything leaving the campus, if it is going to be recycled, is done in an environmentally friendly way.
Very good. Thanks, Scott. Thank you. And I will ask a humorous note here. I assume that you don't encourage your professors just to take property home with them.
We do not, but thank you for asking.
I can imagine there. And with that said, Art, I'm going to get to you in a second. I haven't forgotten about you. I just want to have a little bit of clarification here. We don't want to get them in trouble with the government or their employees. So as these folks speak, they are really providing their personal views. They do not represent the views of their respective government agencies or their employers. So just wanted to clarify that. These are coming from the individual themselves. So, Art, that left us with you from that perspective, doing the hospital and medical facilities perspective. How do you handle these priorities, or what are your priorities for disposal or reutilization within your environment?
Thank you, Doug, and thanks for the introduction. So, like everybody else before me, the priorities would be reutilization, to see we can use the asset in another department within the health system. Some other priorities that we have is, of course, of the Privacy Act, the HIPAA. We want to make sure all our data is secure before we do dispose of anything. And because we get rid of a lot of medical equipment, we want to make sure that that whoever assumes that medical device is credentialed and has the proper licensure to own that device. And then finally, we're also environmentally aware. So we want to be good stewards of the environment and make sure that we recycle where we can.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Art. Excellent. So we're getting a feel and flavor for the direction that each of them is going. I'd like to go a little bit deeper, though, because we're coming from a variety of environments. So within your organization, where are you located? Where did they put you? Where is your office situated to be able to do this type of work? And Art, we're going to take you first and then work our way back up.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm glad it came up, because before I was hired by the hospital, the department fell under supply chain and materials management. During the course of my interviewing and hiring, which took a while, by the time I came on board, and my background is in accounting, the department was moved under the finance umbrella, and that's where it is now. And I just want to add that I'm glad that it is under the finance umbrella, because we just work so closely with the accounting and the budget people and the procurement people, and it just on my experience, the supply chain people just don't have that same opportunity. So I'm glad to be under the finance umbrella.
So, Art, do you think that being under finance helps you more so than supply chain management?
Yes, I do.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. Scott, how about you out there at the university world?
So I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently, but to start, our office is actually located currently on campus. From as long as as much history as I know about our department, it has been on campus. However, this time next year, actually fall in around the holiday time, if not into early January of 2019, we're actually moving off campus. So that's a little bit about where we will be and where we currently are. But property management office, as you mentioned in your opening, we are a centralized office. We fall under the Office of Research Administration. And just so you have a better picture of that, the Office of Research Administration falls under the overarching group or organization, which is called Business Affairs. So my boss, Yvonne Batcher, is a direct report to our Associate Vice President, or the Associate Vice President for Research Administration, and he is a direct report to our CFO, Randy Livingston.
So a fairly flat organizational structure to be able to surface issues and problems and then hopefully get responses, I would assume. Which then takes us to our DCMA. Karen, where are you located within this world of government property?
So we are under the Business Operations Center, which is under the Contracts Executive Directorate, which is part of headquarters. Plant clearance officers are located in hubs across the country. I think we have 6 or 7 hubs throughout the United States, and then we have some plant clearance / property administrators overseas. But I will say, just kind of an interesting note, it's pretty rare if a plant clearance officer is actually located at the same geographic area as the contractors they're working with. We are regionally close by, but not necessarily easily, co-located with the contractor that we work with.
Does that help you, or does that hinder you in your job in some ways?
Well, we do most of what we do is virtual. It can be a hindrance as far as communication and being there in the facilities and seeing things with your own eyes. The benefit, though, of hubbing the plant clearance officers is that training, on the job training, is a lot easier when you're not isolated by yourself out there trying to learn job skills. So it does create consistency among the plant clearance officers being co-located.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Joe, how about you?
Well, when most people think of GSA, they think of the larger service within GSA, which is Public Building Service, which is the landlord of the federal government, managing buildings and leases. But we also have the Federal Acquisition Service, which is the primary service of GSA, and that's where property management and personal property disposal falls under. That would be the Federal Acquisition Service. So when you hear that, you think mostly procurement and contracting for services and supplies. So within the portfolio of general supplies and services, the property program exists because, in theory, before anyone purchases new property, you ought to first be using excess as the first source of supply. So people should be looking at what assets already exist within the federal government that could fill your need before you expend additional taxpayer dollars. So again, we fall under the general supplies and services portfolio of the Federal Acquisition Service.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. So here's here's a question that's more personal, more intimate, and that is, how did you learn to do your job? I don't think this is a job, a position for any of us where you can go to school right now and graduate with a degree and know everything you need to know. So how did you learn to do your job? Was there some formal training or education? Did you do OJT? Did you sit down at your desk and have to read books or regulations? And I'm going to start with Scott first and then move around to the other folks.
So I actually started my career here at Stanford in the research environment. I started off in the School of Medicine, and in that role, I was a facilities coordinator and eventually was a building manager. So my property perspective at that point was as a primary contact for the office that I now work for. So that's how we're kind of set up. So I would say a lot of my training was on the job. I will say that while I was a departmental contact, I did start taking my certification classes through the NPMA. So I started getting a better perspective of what this office does, but it wasn't until I actually arrived in PMO and started working under Yvonne and Stan here that I got the full picture of what is completely involved when with property at the school level.
Very good. Thank you. Joe, I'm sure that there were college programs for teaching you as to the GSA perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there was a combination of formal and on-the-job training, but I would hone in on a couple reasons or a couple areas I would say I best learned the job. Number one, I think if you go on the basis that everything is built on relationships, I think the best way and what I advocate for learning anything about personal property disposal is that you spend time with where the assets are. So from the disposal process, if you're out there at the customer agency interacting with the owner of the assets and the owning agency, and then if you're out there at the state agency that we work in partnership, GSA, to administer the donation program, and even in the case of when we sell items, then you're out there partnering with the custodians of those assets, you know, that's the way you really learn it. You're actually there with the other people that are controlling the process. And the second way I would say is that once you gain the information, the best way of really learning it is to actually teach it. So I say we have a pretty robust educational process within GSA, offering different classes periodically on personal property disposal principles, as well as specialized classes in different areas of personal property disposal. And so if you present information to anybody, then you really are learning it a lot better.
And Joe, I would agree with you wholeheartedly there. Art, coming in from your background in finance and accounting, were you able to transition that into learning as to how to do property and asset management and the disposal and reutilization aspects?
Yes, but it wasn't easy, and it took a little while. And my transition into property really was a result out of a need that I saw in the finance world, where a lot of equipment that is kept on the what they call the fixed asset register, which is capital assets. It was very difficult to reconcile the capital assets on the corporate fixed asset register to the actual fixed assets because of just the wide variety of ways that you can capitalize things. And so, for example, if a company let's say they have a capitalization threshold for depreciation purposes of, let's say it's $1,000, and they buy, say, about 10 laptops, and say they're $1,000 a piece. So the rules in accounting say that you can just put one line item on your fixed asset register that says laptops quantity 10. So if you're in a larger organization, that's going to be difficult come year-end inventory time. It might be difficult to track down 10 laptops, but you can apply that same scenario with furniture, with equipment, with anything. So it's really difficult to reconcile physical property to what's being recorded on your fixed on your balance sheet. And then when the Sarbanes-Oxley came out to made the rules a little bit tighter and made corporate executives a lot more accountable to the accuracy of their financial statements, I kind of saw an opportunity there, and I started helping companies do just that, reconcile their physical capital equipment to what's on their registers. And then, so from there, I decided that why stop at just capital equipment? And so I learned about the NPMA and went through the certification courses about just all personal property, controlled and capital, and I just fell in love with doing it. And so when I saw the availability of this position that I'm in now, and I interviewed and I got this job, I just started applying everything that I had known from the accounting world and everything that I learned from the NPMA, and just started putting it all together into processes. And that's how I got to where I am right now.
Very good. Thank you, Art. So a rather roundabout journey, but one that took you to our world. Which leaves us with you, Karen. I assume that the day the government hired you as a plant clearance officer, you knew everything you needed to do.
No, I did not. We have a combination of on-the-job training and formal classroom training for property. The disposition portion can be a little thin, though, so I would say probably most of what we learn is on the job. So there's property courses through DAU, and then we also go through demilitarization training. That's a separate classroom training. And then we have instructions and things like that we have to do, and contracting classes through CBTs. So a combination of formal and on the job.
Very good. And yes, Karen, that was meant to be facetious, as I'm very well versed in the DoD training requirements out there. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I have a lot more questions, but Jessica, I believe there are some questions coming in. I cannot see them in toto on my screen, so I'm going to turn it over to you and maybe ask you to pick one of them that have come in from our folks out there in the field.
Sure, we have a long list here. Okay, so the first question I have in my queue: what is the disposition process at a high level when it comes to common stock or material under contract termination?
Any of you want to take a shot at that? And Karen, since it's under contract termination, I think if you can jump in there, if not, maybe I can help out a little bit. But please,
sure.
Karen, can you help on that one?
Okay, yeah, we do property disposition on terminated contracts quite a bit within the plant clearance world for DCMA. So it is a little bit different creature than normal property disposition. And so the big question of title comes up. If you have contractor acquired property on a fixed price contract, you can claim that on your termination settlement. And I don't know if I'm getting too into the weeds here for what you're actually asking about, but the plant clearance process or the excess process works similarly, other than we're going to be out there physically verifying every item and doing allocability reviews to make sure that the property is allocable to the termination settlement. All of that gets coordinated with a terminating contracting officer and your plant clearance officer. Doug, you think I'm hitting on what they're asking here, or?
Sure. And I might just throw in one other thing.
Sure.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, that the answer always is it depends. We need all of the facts and data surrounding this. So one of the questions I would ask, well, does this contractor have a material management accounting system? for a DoD contract, and that would require other screening for reutilization internal to the company. But Karen, no, you did a fine job there talking about allocability reviews and that stuff. Jessica, I was able to open up my screen on questions there, and this is a good one that I think could have different applications for all four of the people. And it's a loaded question because it has a presupposition of an answer, right? The question is, have you found the best method for sales is using third-party vendors? So there's an assumption that you are using third-party vendors, but I'd like to hear some feedback from the different folks there, Scott or Art or Joe.
Hey, Doug, can you repeat that question just because I didn't hear the first part of it correctly?
Here we go. The question is, have you found the best method for sales is using third-party vendors?
And okay, so I'll answer it briefly. It depends, but it depends on the asset and it depends on the situation. But you know, we have our own system, GSA, that we created, like an eBay-like online auction. So it's not a third-party vendor; it's a system, and we run it, and we believe that is the best system to sell the majority of our assets. However, having said that, we do partner with our GSA fleet organization, and we piggyback off of their contracts at auction houses. And for certain vehicles, we do find it advantageous to use the third-party vendor auction house to sell our vehicles at times. So, but for the most part, we believe in, and we have actually tested our GSA auctions online system against eBay even for certain items, and found that our GSA auction site brings back better return on items than even the eBay site as a system. But from the standpoint of third party, we're primarily only using that third party solution in our world with executive property for vehicles at times.
Very good. Thank you. Scott, anything from the university world for using third-party vendors?
We actually do not use third-party vendors, and all sales should be going through our property manager. All sales of equipment, or we actually don't. I'm unclear if we are currently doing vehicles on a regular basis. I think we have in one or two spotty occasions, but we do not utilize third-party entities for any sale.
Interesting. Art, how about you?
Yes, we do, and for the most part we do, and I am very pleased with the results, particularly because of the limit number of staff I have. The third party just takes a lot of that weight off of our shoulders, and they take care of it, and they make sure that the buyer for medical equipment has the correct credentials. As far as if it's computer related, we have another third party that will make sure that there's all the privacy information is secured or shredded, whatever, and that they need to do. So yes, we do third party for disposal.
Interesting. Good. There was a follow-up that the same individual asked. Is the GSA Training Program open to contractors, they wanted to know?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the class, yeah, we're open to entertaining contractors as attendees, yeah.
Right. Very good. Very good. Art, I'm going to jump back to you. One of the people wanted to ask you to share an example of two of your processes for reconciling financial records with physical assets.
Okay, so first of all, there are two different systems involved. So there's a inventory system, and then there's the depreciation system, which is used by accounting. And each of those systems have and generate their own unique identifying numbers. So on the depreciation system, there are identifying numbers for each record, and those identifying numbers are recorded in the inventory system, and then vice versa. So in the inventory system, it's usually the barcode number, and then that's recorded in the depreciation system. So initially, once this is all cleaned up, it's not so bad going forward, because we do this reconciliation on a monthly basis, and so we work in conjunction with our accounting department, and so they now break out their assets, whereas at one time they might lump them all together. So initially, it's a painful process to do, because the older assets need to get broken down into individual, if it's a lump sum purchase, into individual assets. But again, once that process is done, it's a simpler process to just reconcile on a monthly basis. So as we dispose of a property, we segregate the capital equipment and we send that list to accounting so they can remove those items from the books. And then then we reconcile the capital additions that they provide to us with our records. So it's hand in hand, working closely with the accounting department. I hope that answers.
Very good, and you had that inroads, your background in finance and accounting, so that helps. Karen, here's a good one for you that from my perspective, cause you to chuckle just a tiny bit. Here we go, Karen. Rather than go through Pcars, wouldn't it be easier just to turn everything off the DoD contract to DRMS, or now the Defense Logistics Agency Disposal Service, and let them handle the disposals?
Well, I don't think that would be the best option for the taxpayer. As part of the contracts that DoD lets with the contractor, part of it is that we're paying defense contractors to have a property management system, which includes disposal. So having everything shipped off to a DRMO when we could handle the disposal kind of on site, you would say, with these contractors, I think would incur a lot of additional costs.
Okay, short and sweet answer. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Doug, I would concur on that answer.
I'm sorry?
I would agree with Karen's answer there.
And absolutely, yeah, no, there was no point of disagreement there. So, Scott, here we go. We don't want to leave you out there in left field. Is there a time frame in which a sponsor is supposed to respond to a recommendation for disposition?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. It's actually a question we covered yesterday at our conference that was brought up. There isn't like a set amount of time. Although if I was reaching out to a sponsor for disposition instructions, I would not recommend letting too much time slip by. So certainly if you send a letter out or email or however you choose to contact them and you don't hear a response, I'd recommend following up maybe 2 to 3 more times, and just mention in those letters, if you do not hear back, then you are going to go ahead and move. You're going to take that as a confirmation that you can go ahead and proceed with disposition per your institution's guidelines, if that makes sense.
Very good. Broad question for everybody came in, all right? The question is, what are some of the best options available for recycling computers and research equipment? So I think that all 4 of us on the panel, all 4 of you on the panel, can weigh in on this one. So anybody, take the first crack at it.
Well, when you say the best option, there are multiple options. And again, it depends on the quality and condition of the computers we're talking about. I mean, within GSA, we have a Computers for Learning program where we initially can transfer workable computers to schools pre-K through 12, and that's a very worthwhile program. If the computer equipment is not workable and it's more in scrap condition, then the two of the best options are we have developed term contracts for certain agencies with certain recycling vendors, and they provide back a per pound amount of money to us for the service of removing that scrap equipment. And then we also obviously partner with Unicor and the prisons entity that we work with them on actually disposing in an environmentally friendly way certain scrap computer equipment. So it would all depend on the quality and condition of the computer equipment before I could conjecture which way would be best.
Very good. Thank you, Joe. Joe, Karen, from a Pcars and plant clearance perspective, any ideas?
Well, I'm going to just kind of piggyback off what Joe said. Computers for learning. I know a lot of plant clearance officers use Unicor when it's geographically feasible to kind of use them for the recycling of scrap computers. The Stevenson Wilder Act will allow us to donate research equipment to universities, but we follow a lot of the same kind of decision-making and procedures that GSA does when it comes to computer equipment.
Very good, very good. Scott, I don't know if the university out there has any computer equipment. Do they deal with that stuff?
Yeah, we deal with computer equipment, and what we do is we do try to sell that through our surplus sales. Computers are completely wiped and hard drives replaced and or smashed before any of that actually happens, so there is no data that is left on a machine. But if we do go ahead and pick up a computer and it appears to be in good working order, and we can go ahead and put it up for any sort of reutilization and or sale, we certainly do so. In regards to those that we can't, we have a recycler that does a great job, so we separate out all of that computer equipment before they come pick it up.
Art, how about in the hospital world? I know that when I go see my doctor at this point, yeah, sorry guys, there's a second line coming in, so we're just going to have to let that one die, all right? Oh, this is horrible. I don't know how to get the ringer to go down. Yes, okay. It'll shut off in a minute, guys. Forgive me. That's never happened before. So, okay, so Art, with the hospitals, I know when I go to my doctor now, he doesn't write anything down on charts. Rather, he's putting all the data input into computers. What about the hospital and medical stuff?
So, like I mentioned a little bit earlier about having a electronics recycler take care of that stuff. It's really just because of our limited resources, and we need to, as a support department for the health system, we need to focus in other areas. So when it comes to disposing of electronic devices, we have an agreement with an electronics recycler, and they make sure that the hard drives are shredded, and we get a certificate of destruction from them. But it's just an area that we don't just have the capability of investing a lot of time in. So that's really our recourse, is to go through an electronics recycler and let them. They purchase the electronics directly from us.
Thanks, Art. Doug, are you on mute?
There we go. Sorry, folks. I'm talking. I shut the microphone off, right? So this one is for Art, all right? As a follow-up, do hospitals have government property, and do they have to go through Pcars? And we haven't framed what Pcars is, the Plant Clearance Automated Reutilization Screening System that's out there. So, Art, any knowledge of that system that you might use?
Well, there's different kinds of structured hospitals. I happen to be in a not-for-profit one, so I can't speak to a for-profit hospital. I don't know how they work, and so we are in part funded by a county tax base, and so we have our own screening process, and in a hospital, in this hospital, the categories of equipment are generally, I would say, like 30% of our personal property is medical equipment, 30% probably can be broken down into computer-related equipment, another 30% in furniture and fixtures, and then just various other categories would be the remaining 10%. So those major stakeholders in biomed, engineering, and IT are the ones that determine whether or not to dispose of that particular category of asset. With the furniture and the fixtures, we do have a screening process that we go through that looks at the condition of it, if it's still up to standards of the system, and then if it is, we'll reutilize it in another department. As far as like a Pcard, I'm not really familiar with the concept in what I think it's being framed. To me, a Pcard is like a purchasing card.
Oh, and Art, no, I didn't say Pcard. I apologize. There is a computer system that is used within DoD called Pcars. Chrysler used to have the K-Cars. Well, DoD has the Pcars.
Okay.
That was meant to be humorous. It's the Plant Clearance Automated Reutilization Screening System that's out there. So I would think unless you're under very specific government contract with the Department of Defense, probably you're not going to use that. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper with all of you and figure out how all of this stuff happens in some ways. Specifically, who are the key participants in the disposal process? Do you have a centralized operation, a decentralized operation? How many staff are involved there? If you have a rough order of magnitude of how many items you disposition or on a monthly basis, any thoughts on that one? And this was open to anybody here.
Well, this is Joe. I mean, I don't have the figures in front of me in terms of line items and such. I know since we broker, we essentially are a broker of the property that's reported into us, and it's probably a small percentage based on the line items that we're able to transfer and donate. But we set a goal for nationally $1 billion in acquisition costs, because we judge everything based on the original acquisition cost of items. And we set $1 billion as our performance target for the federal transfers. And then we set a certain amount for the donation program, and then whatever's left over, we sell. Of course, we don't sell the DoD assets for the most part. They have their own third-party vendor that sells those surplus assets. As far as are we decentralized and such, we're structured in 5 zones. As I said, we're the Mid-Atlantic zone, as Doug alluded to. So my zone encompasses the whole Northeast corridor. So all the New England states, New Jersey and New York, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and then the 5 Mid-Atlantic states of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, and West Virginia. That's the Mid-Atlantic zone. But nationally, we have 5 zones, and we handle property assets based on where they are located. So if anything's located and reported as excess in my zonal area, then we would handle those assets. Again, I don't have all the numbers in front of me. I would like, obviously us to transfer and donate more and sell less because, again, inherently there's more return on value if we're able to reutilize at the federal or at the state donation level the assets.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. That's excellent. Karen, how about the plant clearance operation within DCMA for contractors? Not talking about DLADS, not the old doctor DRMO operation, but currently, how many plant clearance officers are there out there?
I would say 50 to 60. And actually, while I was kind of doing a little research here on what we've done so far in the fiscal year. So far, the DCMA plant clearance group has closed cases of inventory schedules, a little over $630 million worth of assets this fiscal year, and reutilize a little bit over $300 million worth. So there's about 50 plant clearance officers. I would say on average, we are dealing with, a couple thousand line items at any one given moment in time. And then defense costs. We deal with the defense contractors. So throughout the United States, you could be, we have a few plant clearance officers that work directly with one contractor, but that's pretty rare. Usually we have a number of contractors throughout a multi-state region that we're working with.
Excellent. So it appears that you guys, both GSA and DCMA, you're doing a pretty good job earning your pay and earning your keep in terms of return on investment out there.
Yes.
That was an observation, not a question. Hey, Scott, how about you at the university? How many folks are actually involved with handling, and you can broaden that out to handling property and the disposition and reutilization part of this aspect?
So it actually starts out, if I'm going to start at the very, it's really the researchers, it's the lab staff, it's the PIs, it's the office staff, that they are one of our key stakeholders. And then from them, it goes to what we call departmental property administrators. They are our clients, they are our department contacts, and they're the people that we utilize when we have questions about capital assets. But so those two groups, and then in terms of our office, we have a group of 5, a surplus sales manager, and then a reutilization person as well. And then we have 2 guys that also go out and do all the pickups of the excess equipment. So that's sort of what our structure kind of looks like, but hopefully that answers the question for you.
Very good, very good. Hey, Scott, do you keep any metrics as to how much property is reutilized, donated back to the university, or moved out to other sales processes or stuff like that?
So I do. We do. I don't have any of that in front of me, unfortunately. But sorry. No, that's okay. This is an informal part of this. These are questions that you're not ready for. They're coming up as we go around. Art, down in your environment, I assume you probably have a staff of about 100 people?
10% of that. Yeah, so...
Okay.
So our key stakeholders are, like I mentioned earlier, the biomedical engineering and IT. And so, yes, I have a staff of 10, and we're either managed or involved with the entire life cycle of the asset. So that's I kind of alluded to that, not having the resources to spend on a lot of time on the disposition, and that, again, that's because, we're involved with the entire life cycle. I'd say we get rid of probably about 450 assets on a monthly basis.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Joe, we got a question in, and this one is right up your line. I mean, I could not have thought of a better question for you. So, Joe, are you ready?
Yeah, as long as it's a softball, Doug.
It is, Joe, all right? The questioner wants to know, what is GSA?
What is GSA? Well, it's General Services Administration, small independent agency of the federal government. It was created in 1949. Again, in large part, as I said before, split between two services, the Public Building Service and the Federal Acquisition Service. So in some respects, the large portion of GSA manages all the real property holdings, the federal buildings and leased locations. And then what I'm involved in, which is personal property disposal, falls under the Federal Acquisition Service. So we buy and then sell anything you can think of in terms of personal property assets.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, that was a question. I thought it was important. GSA, essentially, as I said before, is the granddaddy of government property for the U.S. Federal government, created by the Federal Property Administrative Services Act of 1949. So, yeah, Joe, I hope that was an easy question for you, all right? Which means that at this point, we are running out of time. We have about 4 minutes left, and I want to throw one more question out to the group here. For the community out there listening to this webinar, do you have any last words of advice to make their disposition, disposal, reutilization lives any easier, or that you believe is critical information to share in addition to what you've already shared? Karen, we'll start with you first. Again, ladies first, go for it.
Okay, I would just say that communication is key, and I'm speaking directly to my situation, but working with defense contractors, the more that you can communicate with your plant clearance officer and the more information that you share, the better and the easier the process will be. And I usually do tell my contractors as well that the more information that you have up front, although it may take a little longer when you're inputting schedules or declaring your excess, the easier the process is going to go from that point forward. So that would be my piece of advice.
Thank you, Karen. Joe, how about you?
Well, I would echo what Karen just said, but again, everything in our world of personal property disposal is predicated on the best description of the assets. And when I say the best description, that includes pictures, because we really put a high premium on having pictures connected to the assets that we're trying to dispose of.
Very good. Thank you, Joe. Another constructive suggestion out there. Scott, University World, any thoughts for us?
I have two thoughts, and I'll keep them brief. But if you don't have a process for disposition, I would certainly encourage development of a clear and streamlined process. Something that is simple. Keep it simple, and then as you're developing, certainly include the end users in the planning process, or a key group of them, so that you can address any of their concerns. And then the other part is just, as was already mentioned, a lot of communication, a lot of outreach, a lot of promotion, so that folks know what the process is, what's available, and know who to go to if they have any questions.
Very good. Art, not last, certainly not least, your thoughts?
I would just echo what the other panelists just said, and I would say you need to document and to standardize the process, and also to just network and talk to people. And yeah, that would be my advice.
Excellent, excellent. Jessica, I'm going to turn it back to you. I have 2:59 Eastern time there. I know that there are so many other questions that are out there. I wish we could handle all of them. I do have to say that I'd like to thank all of the group, the panel that's done that. Joe Veretti, Karen Yamnitz, Scott Ray, and Art Kurland. Thank you to all of you who have also viewed or listened in. Jessica, the microphone is yours.
Thanks so much, Doug, and thanks everyone for participating on the panel and for the 5 million questions that we got today. This was a great discussion. I would definitely encourage everyone, if you have questions that haven't been answered, in addition to kind of access to the panel members and to Doug, we also have the Excess and Disposition SIG Special Interest Group on the NPMA website. So these are all great questions that can be posed there as well. And then my final note, if you notice in your chat box, I did send a link to a webinar that Karen is actually doing for us on April 18th on Pcars. I know there were a ton of questions regarding Pcars, and she's got a big overview planned on the 18th, so definitely check out that link. It's also going to be in your news flash every week for the next couple of weeks also, so definitely join that. But thank you, everyone, for participating today, and have a great afternoon.